Hello, welcome to the UFC Fight Night 126 breakdown, which is going to be headlined by Cowboy Cerrone and Yancy Medeiros. A lot of good fights coming up in 2018. A lot of good fights, and some good fights have already happened. Like, there's a lot of potential for this year to be a really good year for the UFC. Before we jump into that, let's talk about the fights that just happened this past weekend. Romero lit up Luke Rockhold. And then when Rockhold was down against the fence after he already rocked him, he hit him with an uppercut that almost took his head off. Romero is scary, man. And the problem with Romero winning that fight is that it fucks the division up even more than it already is, because Romero missed weight for that fight. And does he deserve a chance to rematch Whitaker? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, because there's a lot going on at 185. GSP won the belt from Bisping, relinquished it. So then Whitaker was supposed to fight Rockhold this weekend, and you thought that there was going to be like a return to normalcy at 185 pounds. But then Romero misses weight, turns everything on its head by knocking Rockhold out, and now you have to have the discussion about whether Romero should fight a guy who he already lost to after he missed weight in the fight for Rockhold. But the next guy in line is Chris Weidman, who Romero has already beat. I would imagine Weidman would be the next in line. That would be my guess, at least. So it's complicated there. And Rockhold winning would have been better for the health of the division, I think. But now, I mean, what you'll probably see is Romero is going to rematch Whitaker, I would imagine. I don't know what else he can do there. I don't think he can let Weidman skip the line like that, because you had a number 1 versus number 2 contender fight in Romero and Rockhold came out on the bottom of it. So I don't know how you let Weidman jump Romero when Romero has a win over Weidman. I don't know. I think probably the most likely scenario is Romero's going to get a rematch, like I said. But is there ever a fight where something dirty doesn't happen with him? I mean, Tim Kennedy, Jacare, now this, like missing weight. Missing weight's a huge problem in the UFC, and it seems to be becoming a trend lately. I think the addition of more weight classes would help, but at the same time, I can kind of see what Dana White's saying when he says that people are just going to continue to try to cut down if he does that. You know what I mean? Like, more division, like, it might not necessarily solve all your problems, but I think it'll help at least a little bit. Honestly, probably a lot more. I think Dana White's kind of just like doesn't want to change anything because he's built this successful monster in the UFC that dominates the world of MMA. And he's probably thinking like, this is what got us here. Why are we changing anything? But in reality, I think it's coming sooner or later. Just probably going to take a long time getting there with guys like Dana White at the head of the helm. Next up, let's talk about the card, the first weekend of March, I think it is, where Holloway got injured, fell off. Frankie looking for an opponent, and the UFC found him Brian Ortega, which is the fight that they should make. That's the fight that needs to happen at 145. Probably good for Frankie, too, because he gets to stay active. And Ortega's dangerous, man, but Frankie's never been finished. And Ortega is like next level jiu-jitsu, and it's not just his jiu-jitsu, it's the way that he's transformed it to be successful in MMA. Because they're a little bit different, right? Like, there are certain things that you can do in jiu-jitsu, like a pure jiu-jitsu setting, that you can't do in a fight. And he's got a really, really good style for MMA, specifically for that. But he's really good off his back, but Frankie's really good on top on his wrestling, right? And keeping constant pressure on you and ground and pound, and just the pace that he sets is ferocious and it's relentless. So it's going to be, this is a really interesting fight, because these are probably the two most deserving contenders of a title fight at 145. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. I don't know, tough fight. We can talk about that more. I really want to watch, like, I've seen almost all of Frankie's fights, but I'd like to brush up on some of them, some of Ortega's, before giving an opinion on that. And I'll probably do a breakdown for that card anyway, so we can talk about that more as the fight gets closer. Also, for that fight, they found a headliner in Cyborg versus some girl who I've never even heard of. But Cyborg's marketable. She's got a win over Holly Holm. She's a champion, so you get a title fight on that card. Kudos to the girl stepping in to fight Cyborg to save that card. That's a ballsy move, but it's kind of like low risk, high reward, right? no one's going to blame you for losing to Cyborg. But if you somehow miraculously pull off an upset, you're going to be an instant star because everyone knows how good Cyborg is. Like, there's no real downside to you taking that fight. You get to headline a card, and what I think is her UFC debut. Maybe it's not. I've never seen her fight. I don't know much about her. I'll try to do a little research, like I said, as the card gets closer when we do the breakdown for that. But at least Frankie still gets to fight. Because I think it's good for Frankie to stay active as opposed to sitting on the sidelines and waiting for Max. Maybe not, though. Ortega's risky. Like, it's a risky fight, but Frankie's never going to turn the fight down. Obviously, he wants to fight. I think we also need to talk a little bit about the rules that are currently in place for MMA. You saw this past weekend in what was a hell of a fight. Jake Matthews versus Li Jinglong, the Leech. Jinglong was gouging the eyes out of Matthews. And what do you do in that situation? Do you take a point from them? Because when you have a 10-point must system in place, which means you have to give the winner of the round 10 points and the loser of the round 9 or less, it can be... Well, they are doing something positive, I think, and they're starting to implement more 10-8 rounds, which is good. But when you have a fight that you win around 10-9 and you do something illegal, if you take a point away, you are radically affecting the outcome of that fight. Like, what was a 10-9 round for that guy just became a 9-9 round, and it's a tie, even though it might have been a really decisive round for him. And do you take one error that he made, and is that error enough to turn that round into a tie? I think it's probably the best way to do it is to probably leave it in the hands of the refs, which they've kind of been doing already, and just, it's got to be up to them. Like, they have to make a judgment call on whether it's worth it to take the point in that situation. Because I think there's a lot of problems with scoring and judging in MMA as it is. So I think that you have to address the scoring issue first before you can start addressing the deduction for points issue and the penalty for fouls. And the severity of them is also going to play a part, right? Like that was a blatant eye gouge, and I think that's an instant point that should be taken away at least. Or, I mean, if you're and I think Matthews had him in a guillotine. I could be wrong. But when you are using an illegal tactic to prevent someone from finishing a fight, oh man, you gotta wonder if you should just disqualify them, because that illegal tactic may have caused him to escape from something that would have otherwise been a finish. There's a lot of work that needs done in MMA, and I'm hoping to see some progress as we move along this year, but who the hell knows? All right, let's move on to the fights this weekend. Like I said, we got the headliner's going to be Cowboy Cerrone and Yancy Medeiros. Medeiros is coming off that war against Alex Oliveira, the other Cowboy. Crazy fight, maybe one of the best fights I've ever seen. Insane fight. And Cowboy is another one. Cowboy's actually been struggling lately, though. He's on a 3-fight losing skid. So he's going to have to come out and really pour it on. Should be an interesting card all the way through. There's a fair amount of well-known, a lot of seasoned fighters on this card, right? You got Francisco Trinaldo fighting Thiago Alves. Northcutt's opening the card up. I know he's not like a seasoned vet or anything. He's only 21 years old, but he's a name. Derek Lewis, and obviously Cowboy, who's got 100 fights in the UFC. Not literally, but you know what I mean. He fights constantly. Like, he's had like 3-week turnarounds and stuff, and to be doing that at that level might be detrimental to him, right? Like, he's been sliding a little bit, so we'll have to see. Let's work our way up the card. Let's start off with Sage Northcutt and T-Ball Goody. I don't know which one it is. He's French, and he's used to play squash professionally, which that's like, I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up. It's like, have you ever been to the YMCA and you got that little rubber ball and you toss it up and hit it with the racket off the wall? I think that's what that is, which is probably a good sport for, like, the lateral movement that he had to use to move back and forth might have translated to helping his footwork in MMA, but not real comparable sports, right? But he's athletic, apparently. I mean, like I said, his ability to move side to side is pretty good. He's got really good head movement, and he is active. He's moving a lot. He's 12-3. Last 3 fights, he picked up a win over Andrew Holbrook And Holbrook has a win over Jake Matthews, who we were just talking about, who's really good on the ground. Then before that, he's got 2 losses, one to Chad LaPrice and one to Oliver Robin Mercier, who is an animal on the ground. And he looked good in all of his fights. He's got, like I said, he's got good head movement. He lost his first 4 UFC fights. That's a problem. But he picked up, like I said, a win over Holbrook, who has a win over Matthews. So that's a good win for him to start getting on track. He got eliminated early in the Ultimate Fighter. I think one of the things that probably helped him win his most recent fight was his transition to Jackson Wink MMA, which is one of the most famous gyms in the world. I mean, getting in there with guys like that and being surrounded by high-level fighters all the time is definitely going to up your game. So I'm sure that's helped him out a lot. And Sage Northcutt, obviously, karate background. He gets all this shit sometimes, and I don't know why. I mean, the kid was fighting in the UFC when he was 18 years old, and he's 21 and already has 6 fights, and he's 4-2. And both of his losses have come at welterweight. And one was against Mickey Gall, who is a high-level brown belt in jiu-jitsu. Like, he has really good ground skills. And in a fight that Sage was doing well in on the feet, he just got clipped, and then when it went to the ground, when you get rocked like that and go to the ground and then get someone as high level as Gall is swarming you and just like suffocating you, and you're trying to deal with the fact that you're rocked and then getting someone like that off of you, it's a hard thing to deal with. And then he got, in his first bout at welterweight, he got caught in that, I think he got caught in an arm triangle, right? And people were bitching at him for tapping too early. But then he goes on and fights Enrique Martin and gets caught in a deep armbar. I mean, most people would have tapped to the armbar that he got put in. So right when everyone starts accusing him of not being tough enough, he comes back in a fight like that and fights off an armbar. Just cut the kid some slack. He's only 21. Like I said, he's already got 6 fights, and he's got a lot of room to grow. He's extremely athletic, and his striking is explosive. He's, if he can stay focused, and my biggest knock on Sage has been that he's impatient. He doesn't, like, he's always bouncing, and you can almost see, like, the anxiety in him when he's fighting. He needs to, if he can calm down and start stringing some combos together and avoid getting put in some of the situations that he's been put in so far, he's going to be a real problem in that division. And lightweight, that I mean, I talk about all the time what a Shark Tank the 155-pound division is. And he's got a tough road ahead of him, but he's also got a lot of potential. And I think that just kind of back off the kid. He's young, like, let him figure it out. He's gonna be fine, in my opinion. He's got a tremendous upside. I remember when he first came in, people were like, oh, they're feeding him fighters that they know is going to win. But he's only 18 years old. Like, what else are you supposed to do with him? To me, that people just want to see him lose, and they want to see him fight someone who's going to beat his ass. So, I don't know. I like Northcutt in this fight. I think that Goatee's going to want to stand on his feet, and I think that's a bad idea against Sage, because Sage is good on his feet. He's explosive. I think you'll see a massive strength difference when Sage starts landing on him. But Mickey Gall clipped Sage. I'm not saying Goatee can't do it. I just think that the style of fight that Goatee is probably going to want to fight doesn't match up well against Sage. I think Sage is going to have the upper hand. I don't know. Sage has that power, but I like this fight to go the distance because Goatee's tough. I think it'll be like a unanimous decision win for Northcutt. Like I said, a lot of upside with Sage Northcutt. I mean, people hate it. Love him or hate him. A lot of people hate him. Or don't like the fact that, not necessarily hate him, just don't like the fact that you got this, like, religious, overly nice, spiky-haired blonde kid fighting in the UFC. People hate that for whatever reason, right? They think he's like a pretty boy and they want to see him lose. But back off. He's good. He's a good fighter. He's a promising prospect. Next on the fight is Brandon Davis versus Steven Peterson. These are two kids who have fought on, I shouldn't call them kids, they're older than me. They fought on the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series. Brandon Davis came out victorious in a really good fight against Austin Arnett, and then moved on and lost a unanimous decision in his UFC debut. And that bout took place at 155. And Steven Peterson lost to Benito Lopez at bantamweight in the Tuesday Night Contender Series. And now he's bumping up to one. This fight's going to take place at 145. So Davis is moving down, and Peterson is moving up. Whether 145 is actually Peterson's natural weight class or what he usually fights at, I don't know. I don't know if he bumped down to 135 because he had the opportunity to fight in the Contender Series. But a lot of his success in the Contender Series fight against Benito Lopez came when he was in the clinch and pushing Benito up against the cage. And Brandon Davis is a big guy, man. I mean, I think he's going to have a tremendous size advantage in this fight. And I don't think that the things that were working for Peterson in that fight against Lopez are going to work against Davis. Davis has really good head movement, and he's a really, really smooth striker. Very smooth. Gets tagged a little bit, right? But I just think that it's going to be too much for Peterson to handle. And like I said, that ability to push Benito up against the fence made that fight really close. I don't think he's going to be able to do that to Davis. I think if he gets him there, Davis is going to kind of shrug him off, and I just think he's too big. That's what this boils down to. Because, I mean, when you get to a UFC level of competition, size does start to matter, right? And when you got Davis, I think Davis is just going to look a lot bigger than him, and I think I think he's a better striker. Just using the eye test and what I've seen, Davis strings his combinations together a little bit more, and I think he'll have a little more pop on his punches and kicks. For Peterson, he's going to be, I mean, get inside, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Peterson's one of those guys who doesn't look real strong, and then when he gets you in the clinch and stuff, he's got that like weird strength. Like, he doesn't look like he could lift a lot of weight or anything like that, you know what I mean? But he's got that freak strength, that like Ben Askren type of strength, where when he grabs a hold of you, people go, "What the fuck?" So maybe if he can do that against Davis, he can have some success. This fight just boils down to size for me. Like I said, I think Davis is going to probably walk away with the victory. I think he's going to knock him out. I really like his striking. I'm taking Davis in the second round. I think Peterson's tough. I think he'll walk through some of the stuff, but I think some of the shots that he's going to absorb are going to be just a little bit too much to handle in bulk. So yeah, take Davis, second round KO. Next, we got Thiago Alves versus Curtis Millender. And this is a welterweight bout. Thiago Alves tries to drop down and fight Jim Miller. Lost via unanimous decision, but this was 2 fights ago for him. He most recently beat Patrick Cote in a fight where he looked really good, dropped Cote a couple times. But when he bumped down to 155 to fight Miller, he missed weight. And Miller, instead of like not accepting the fight, gained weight so that he could fight Thiago Alves, because you have to be within 5 pounds of your opponent. So Miller, and like Alves obviously had a terrible weight cut, and Miller, being the badass that he is, gained weight so that the fight could still go on, and then he won. So that prompted, I think, Alves to just move back to welterweight. But Alves has been around for a while. He's got wins over Matt Hughes, Josh Koscheck. He's fought names like John Fitch, Rick Story, Martin Kampman, Caro Parisian, Jordan Mean, Spencer Fisher, who he lost to via submission, I think. I mean, he's been around the UFC for a long time, and that's going to be his biggest advantage when he goes into a fight against Curtis Millender, who is fighting out of LFA, which is, I think, Legacy Fighting Alliance. He's on a 6-fight win streak over there. Just knocked the last 2 guys that he fought. He knocked them out via head kick. And for those of you who don't know, LFA is kind of like a feeder organization to the UFC, right? You have MMA as the sport, and then within MMA you have different organizations. Like, up at the very top is UFC. That's where all the fighters are trying to get to. And then you have organizations like Bellator and World Series of Fighting are probably the next 2 best divisions. And then you got ones like LFA and Alaska Fighting Championship, stuff like that feed fighters into the UFC. So a lot of potential prospects come out of little organizations like this. Like I said, this guy is coming off 2 knockouts in a row, 6 wins in a row. 30 years old, this is going to be his UFC debut, and it's a tough debut against someone like Alves who's seen it all. And if you look at his fight against Miller, I know he lost, but his ability to understand what's going on in the clinch and on the ground and just the different situations, he's been exposed to them all. And that experience pays dividends Like his ability to get back to his feet against Miller. I mean, Miller was getting the better of him on the ground, but Alves was eventually able to work back to his feet. I think that's going to be Alves' biggest advantage in this fight, is going to be all the high-level experience that he's seen. This is a really tough fight. There's like, the rest of these fights, in my opinion, are really, really tough to pick. I'm relatively confident in the first two, but these next, there's 6 fights on this card, so these next 4, I'm on the fence about all of them. I'm going with Millender. I just like the fact that he's on a roll right now, and I think that if he can mix in his striking and stuff and get the kicks going and he's really creative in his setups. Okay, so but the problem is going to be, are you going to be able to be creative in your setups at the UFC level against a guy who's seen everything that you're going to throw at him? It's going to be tough. I still like Millender just because I like the momentum that he's riding. It's his UFC debut. He's going to be fired up. It's a good debut for his. I mean, Millender's 14-3, right? Alves is 22-11. I would expect to see Millender have an advantage on the feet when they're striking a little bit. I think he's going to kind of keep Alves at bay. But look for Alves to kind of have an advantage in this. And I think these guys both might be brown belts. Alves might be a black belt. But they might be evenly matched on paper on the ground, like relatively evenly. But I would look for Alves just having that experience with guys like Jim Miller, you know what I mean, Matt Hughes, Koscheck, like all that high-level grappling experience is going to pay off for him a little bit. So if it turns into like a clinching type of fight where it's going to the ground and a lot of work up against the cage and stuff, I like Alves. But if it stays standing and Millender gets to pick his shots and stuff and start stringing together some combos, I like him. I'm going to go with Millender as my official pick, but this fight could go either way, as the rest of these could. Next is lightweight bout between Francisco Trinaldo and James Vick. Trinaldo, he has a unanimous decision win over Jim Miller. Jim Miller's a high-level black belt, by the way, and Trinaldo was able to get on top of him and, I mean, look good on the feet. Before that, he lost to Kevin Lee, got rear naked choked, and he got caught. Trinaldo was dropping his hands the whole first round, and then in the beginning of the second, you saw Kevin Lee throw a high kick up there and missed, or he blocked it or something. And I just remember him throwing a high kick early in the second round. And then, so he made the read in the first that he was dropping his hands, and then when Trinaldo came out in the second, he threw it. And then later on in the round, he ended up hitting him with it, and it dazed him, and he was able to hop on top of him, climbing him out, and then take his back and lock in a rear naked choke. And that fight is a fight that Trinaldo was probably winning up until that point. Like, he just made a mental error, dropping his hands, and he got clipped, and it cost him the fight. But before that, he has a win over Paul Felder in another really good fight. But he cut Felder, and it was a doctor stoppage. I mean, Felder had a nasty cut above his eye. The doctor had to come in and look at it, decided it couldn't go on. But another guy who really this reminds me of the last fight a little bit, except James Vick has quite a few UFC fights. Trinaldo's got 16 fights in the UFC, former Brazilian kickboxing champion, Ultimate Fighter vet, 22-5. You know, he's fought Chad the Priest, Ross Pearson, Yancy Medeiros, Paul Felder, Jim Miller, and he's beat all those guys. So, no shortage of experience on his end. Vick is 12-1. Just most recently beat Joe Duffy by KO. Before that, he knocked out Paulo Reyes in the first round. And then he beat Abel Trujillo by Darsh in the third round before that. So he's riding a little win streak right now. He looked good in the Duffy fight, but Duffy was also having some success landing counters. Duffy was moving his head a lot and stuff, and it was a good fight, especially in that first round before Duffy landed the uppercut Vic landed the uppercut on Duffy that put him out. This is another tough fight to pick because Vic's also like 6'3", which is massive for the lightweight division. I mean, to be able to get to 155 pounds when you're 6'3" is incredible. So he's obviously going to have a reach advantage and a little bit of length. So the answer for Trinaldo to that, I mean, you hear this all the time, right? Whenever you're fighting a bigger, longer guy, get inside. And that's probably going to be what it is. I would expect Trinaldo to try to go to the body, beat up the legs a lot, and try to go to the ground. Um, I like Trinaldo in this fight. Tough fight to pick because of James Vick. The key for him is going to be to utilize his length, right? Keep him on the end of your punches, throw your kicks out there, like keep him at bay. But the problem with Trinaldo is he's got really heavy hips. I mean, if you look at his fight against Kevin Lee was struggling to take him down, even up against the fence. He just sinks his hips and digs for these underhooks, and he's a hard guy to bring down. And I think that if Trinaldo can get on top of Vick, he's going to give Vick some really big problems, like ones that he might not be able to overcome. So I think Vick is going to want to keep this fight standing. The problem with that is Trinaldo is tricky on the feet too. I mean, like I said, Brazil kickboxing champion, really good. He's got a really good left hand. This fight's gonna, I think, boil down to where it takes place. If the fight takes place on the outside, like if James Vick can keep him at bay, I think Vick will win. Maybe be able to land a knockout. I don't know, but I like Trinaldo. I think Trinaldo will be able to make it dirty enough that he can get inside and start landing some takedowns. Close fight, though. I'm going to say this a million times, but this is a really good fight card. Really closely contested fight card. I don't know how many fireworks there are going to be on this one, but there are a lot of fights that are... You don't really know who the winner is going to be. I haven't looked at the... I don't really like looking at lines anyway because I think they're kind of bullshit. Like, it's just a bunch of people betting on who they think is going to win. I mean, in cases like when Demetrius Johnson fights, obviously, the odds are going to be astronomically in his favor, and they make sense, but it's fighting, and anything can happen, so I might go back and look at the odds after I'm done with this, but I would expect them all to be relatively close. So co-headliner is going to be Derek Lewis versus Marcin Tybura. Derek Lewis was on a little tear there for a while, right before he lost to Mark Hunt. He got knocked out in the 4th round by him. Before that, though, he knocked out Travis Brown in a fight that I think he said he was going to shit his pants, right? Like, Travis Brown kicked him in the stomach, and he felt like he was going to shit his pants. Ended up coming back, winning via 2nd round TKO. Before that, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the guy's name. Shamil is his first name. Abdurakhimov. I did try to pronounce it, and I know I butchered it. Shouldn't have even attempted it. But he knocked him out via 4th round TKO. But before he lost to Hunt, he was on a 6-fight win streak. He knocked out Gonzaga and Roy Nelson. So Lewis is one of those guys who's not the most technically sound guy that you're ever going to run into, but he just keeps winning, and he's got some power in his hands, and he's explosive, and I don't know. He's not really necessarily like a specialist in anything, but finding success in the UFC, like I said, his only loss in his past 7 fights was to Mark Hunt, and that's not a bad loss to have. I know Mark Hunt's an old guy, but the entire heavyweight division is full of old guys. And Marcin Tybura just lost a unanimous decision to Fabricio Verdum, but it was a 5-round fight. He went 5 rounds with Verdum, which is very impressive because Verdum is probably the most accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner in the heavyweight division in the history of it in the UFC. So to be able to go the distance, and not just for 3 rounds, but for 5 with a guy at that level is very impressive. Before that, he picked up a unanimous decision win over Andrei Arlovsky, and then he knocked out Louis Henrique before that. To me, this fight is just a toss-up. Most heavyweight fights are a toss-up. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And to me, this fight's going to boil down to just who lands that big punch. And I have no idea who it's going to be, so I don't even want to give you a prediction. I guess I'll pick Derek Lewis just because I think he's funny, and he has a good Instagram account. But this is going to be a really good fight. I'd expect to see some fireworks, some big shots landed. And both of these guys have experienced some 5-round fights, which is good for both of them. They both learned some really important lessons, I think, in their most recent losses. So you're going to get to see who made the corrections and stuff, and you know what I mean, who's going to come out on top in this one. It's going to be a big tell of who's going to be moving forward in the division. And then Derek Lewis, I think after he lost to Hunt, said he wanted to retire or something, and now he's back. So I don't know. I don't think he ever really wanted to retire. I think he just probably was on a streak and realized that, like, oh man, I just ran into something that I couldn't get past. And it kind of deflated him for a bit. But I think he's back now. I'd expect to see him in full form. like I said, I don't really want to pick a winner, but I'll go with Lewis just for the sake of picking someone. And finally, we're going to get a headliner between Donald Cerrone and Yancy Medeiros. And Cerrone is on a 3-fight losing skid. He lost to Darren Till in the first round. He got knocked out by him. But Darren Till is a monster. And I think Joe Rogan and Brendan Schaub touched on this a little bit in their most recent podcast. But Cerrone's been doing these like movies and stuff. And the only thing that Darren Till was thinking about was beating Cerrone. And he's an animal. I mean, he's just got, his striking is next level. And he's a big guy for 170, and Cerrone's not a big guy for 170. Cerrone's probably one of those guys who could benefit from having a 165-pound division introduced. Same with like Diego Sanchez. It would have been good for him. And then before that, he dropped the unanimous decision loss to Robbie Lawler, and then he lost to Jorge Masvidal via second-round TKO. And the problem, Cerrone he's notorious for starting slowly. And when you're fighting a guy like Masvidal who does not start slowly and he's pressuring you all the time and he's throwing punches and bunches, right? He's throwing a lot of volume at you. It's hard to deal with. Because Cerrone's one of those people who has to find a rhythm as the fight goes on and start getting into it and start seeing some success with some combos, and it opens up other combos. He's not a guy who's going to come out and start pouring it on you early in the first round. That being said, Cerrone has a ton of UFC experience. I mean, just... let's just go down through some of the guys he's fought. Dennis Seaver, Charles Oliveira, Melvin Gillard. He beat Edson Barboza. Jim Miller, the other cowboy that just fought. Him and Yancy Medeiros have wins over Cowboy Oliveira. And I think Cerrone finished Alex Oliveira via triangle. So he's got underrated jiu-jitsu too. He just doesn't have to use it often because the combinations that he's able to string together are beautiful. I mean, the one that he landed against... who did he fight where he put together... Oh, Rick Story. I mean, that looks like something that you're drilling in the gym and everything landed for him before he finished it. Like he finished that combo out with a head kick. But he knocked Matt Brown out brutally. So he's no shortage of experience on his end. The difference between these two is Cowboy's riding a 3-fight losing streak, and Yancy Medeiros is riding a 3-fight winning streak. His most recent win over Cowboy Oliveira was maybe fight of the year. One of the best fights I've ever seen. I don't say that lightly. Like, there have been a lot of good fights, and this fight was crazy all the way through until he finished Oliveira. Before that, he knocked out Eric Silva in the second round, and before that, he beat Sean Spencer in the second round, rear naked choke. His last loss was actually to Francisco Trinaldo, who we were just talking about earlier. This might be another tough fight for Cerrone. Pour it on him early and not give Cerrone that chance to get into a rhythm. Oh, this is a really tough fight to pick too. I want to root for Cerrone because losing 3 fights in a row is never good, and I know it's Cowboy, but like, where's his head at right now? Especially because, I mean, the last loss that he suffered at the hands of Darren Till was brutal. I've been bouncing back and forth on this one too. I'm going to go with Cerrone just because I think that he needs the win more than Medeiros does. And it's not... Cerrone's just run into 3, like, really high-level guys. And at 170 pound, a division that he hasn't fought at his whole career. He's in a tough spot. And I think a win right now is really important for him, and I think he knows that, so I'd expect him to come out and kind of look for him to try to not necessarily take the fight to Medeiros early. I don't think that's a good idea because it's not like, it doesn't align with Cowboy style, but look for him to try to make Medeiros slow down. Like, counter him a little bit and make him think about coming in and being so aggressive early on. And if he can do that and start landing some shots, maybe he can start putting some combos together in the second and third. And then as the fight wears on, I think you might see Medeiros fade a little bit. But maybe not, because you can't question Medeiros' toughness after seeing that Alex Oliveira fight, where he was rocked and just getting back up, and it was back and forth. And, I mean, some of the shots that he recovered from and the beatings that he took in that fight were incredible. So, I don't know, a brutal fight like that might hurt you in this one, right? Like if Cowboy catches you with a head kick or something, I know that you just absorbed a lot of punishment and like took it like a man in the last fight, but it might hurt you in this one. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Cerrone. I think this is a really evenly matched fight. I'd expect to see some fireworks in this fight. Don't get impatient with this fight. Like I said, if it does, Cerrone's not famous for starting fast, but as the fight wears on, I'd expect it to get more and more. I'd expect to see things start to ramp up as the fight starts to wear on. Look for Cerrone to try to just like counter early on and make Medeiros pay for being aggressive, and then look for Cowboy to start to take over as the fight progresses. Or Medeiros might just pour it on him. I mean, you got some knockouts sprinkled into Cerrone's last few fights now, right? So what does his ability to take a shot look like? And Cerrone's body's always been suspect. The way Pettis beat it up and the way RDA beat it up. So maybe Medeiros comes out and attacks the body and puts him away early. This is a tough fight to pick. I would say that would be the key for Medeiros. Don't let this fight start dragging out into later rounds. Try to finish in the first or second. And pour it on and start attacking the body early and start finding success early against Cowboy. I think that's the key to beating him, and I think a lot of people know that. And I think Cowboy knows that. So I'd expect him to be, like I said, working on some counters and stuff early on. All right, let's go through a recap real quick. I'm going to take Northcutt over Goethe, Davis over Peterson, Melender over Alves, Trinaldo over Vic. This fight's this heavyweight fight, just a toss-up. I'm going to take Lewis for the sake of picking someone, but I really don't. I have no idea who's going to win that. And if you think that you know who's going to win that, you're crazy. Or if you say you know who's going to win, you're crazy, because either of those guys could end the fight at any time. And finally, at welterweight, the headliner, I'm taking Cerrone over Medeiros just because I think the sense of urgency is going to light a fire under Cerrone's ass. I think you'll see a very smart... It's also 5 rounds, so expect to see a very smart and technical fight from Cowboy. He might not be going for the kill or trying to put him away. He has time to kind of pick Medeiros apart and really showcase his skills and let the world know that he's still Cowboy, like the Cowboy that everyone knows and loves, right? A lot of good fights coming up. This is a good free card to watch. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of really, especially the last 4 fights on the card, really good matchups. And then I think there's a fight next weekend as well. Yeah, Jeremy Stevens is fighting Josh Emmett, which is a really good fight. And then you got Frankie and Ortega the weekend after that, with Cyborg fighting whoever she's fighting. So I'll keep rolling these out as the fights keep coming in. And I'll talk to you next time. Thank you.